Listen, I'm going to be honest with you. I hate prepping. I hate homework, really, is the issue. But I love playing D&D, if that is not obvious by this channel, and I love telling stories and playing these games in this medium with my friends, but goddamn, I hate prepping so much. There's this fire that burns within me where I would rather do anything else than prep D&D sometimes. And it's not because I don't want to play. It's because the idea of sitting down and doing homework, something that I spent 18 years of my life, 22 years of my life actually, trying to escape, I have to go back and do twice a week too. Or at least that's how I used to think. Nowadays, it's a lot different. And that's because of a method I developed for myself that makes prepping fun, makes it easier. It makes it more interesting to do, especially when prepping narratives. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. The methodology I use that helps me prep, that makes prepping fun and easy for me. And hopefully it'll help you too. The methodology that I use for myself is the ACT methodology. It is something that I came up with, and it's an acronym, ACT. ACT structure, connections, and twist. The first thing I do is I prepped my act structure, where I make my campaigns or my arcs into a 5-act structure. Then I look for connections to NPCs, locations, and party members' backstories. And then the last step is I go through all of those plot beats that I already wrote for the act structure, and I look for areas where I can twist it, where I can invert a trope, where I can add in a dramatic twist. And I find that doing it that way has really helped me learn to love prepping, like having this specific order in which I do things. And it's made my campaigns more fun. So that's the basics. If you already have an understanding of all three of those concepts, there you go. You're good. Try it out for yourself. See how it works. However, if you're still a little nervous, that's what the rest of the video is for. It's to help you if you're not exactly comfortable with the idea of building your own narrative, especially in a D&D game or in any tabletop RPG, because it's hard. It is difficult. So don't worry. I'm here. Take my hand. I'll hold your hand. It'll be okay. Okay. All right. Part 1. The foundation of legends. Act structure. In general, with all of my campaigns, I plot each individual arc in... Well, here, wait. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's get some definitions, because I'm going to be using some terminology here that you may or may not be familiar with, so I want to make sure that you and I are on the same page, all right, bud? So take some notes if you need to, because these are really tough definitions, all right? I'm just kidding. You probably already know them, but just to be safe in case you don't. The first term that I'm going to use is campaign. Wow, I bet you maybe have never heard that one before. So when I talk about a campaign is the overarching story that spans the entirety of gameplay, encompassing all arcs, acts, and beats. Then we have arc. This is a segment of a campaign that includes a collection of acts, typically 5, contributing to a specific part of a larger narrative. Then we have act, a subdivision of an arc characterized by a sequence of events following a climactic plot structure, typically encompassing 5 stages, like I said before. And then finally, we have beats. This is the smallest narrative unit within an act, representing individual moments or events that cumulatively build the act's progression. All 4 of these definitions are so important because it helps us understand the scale of a story, right? A beat is an individual moment. The party, you want them to travel to a long abandoned orphanage, right? That's believed to be cursed. Children would just die randomly. There's a rumor that the owner of the orphanage was sacrificing them to some dark, poisonous god. An entire act could be them going to investigate the orphanage and everything surrounding it, tracking down the original owner and any cultists perhaps that belong to that dark god to see if there are connections there. An arc is the entire story that starts with them arriving in town and ends with them fighting the orphanage owner and preventing him from being able to summon an avatar of that dark god. And then a campaign that's only one servant of that dark god. Within the campaign, they'll fight 4 or 5 more servants of that dark god before they're able to fully stop them. So we see how there can be this scale of adventure and narrative storytelling that builds upon one step after the other. Beat being the smallest, campaign being the largest. Now, what I said before is that I typically prep my campaigns or my arcs in 5-act structure. The reason I do this is because I am a believer that in long form stories, 5-act structure is best. And I think that nobody encapsulates that better than William Shakespeare. If you don't like William Shakespeare, you maybe just had a bad English teacher and they didn't do it right. I myself taught theater and English when I was still a teacher in high school, and my students loved Shakespeare because I knew how to teach it. But that's neither here nor there. We're not here to talk about Shakespeare. I just believe that the way he wrote his plays is a great methodology to follow how to write your campaigns, how to write your arcs for your campaigns. The reason I like 5-act structure when prepping is it makes it easier. It breaks it down into smaller chunks, which makes it more easy for the players to follow and allows you to do more fun, cool things during any individual given arc. Now, you might be telling yourself, Shakespeare? Shakespeare. I don't care about that pompous little man with his frilly collar, and I get it, right? To a degree, I don't really care about the guy either. But I think that the way that he wrote stories, he did it really well. I mean, there's a reason why in high school classrooms and college classrooms, we still study his plays. That's for 2 reasons. One, the language that he wrote them in is very beautiful, at least to me, somebody who is more theatrical and more artsy-fartsy. I like it. What can I say? Show me, I guess. But there's that, and he wrote universal stories that were easy to understand regardless of what time period you came from. His language was not easy to understand, but the base of the stories was. Take something like Romeo and Juliet. If we remove all the weird historical context and forget about the ages of the characters for just a moment, Romeo and Juliet's universal story is that these are 2 individuals that are told they're not allowed to be together, right? Their families hate each other, so they cannot be in love, even though they desperately want to be so. I think that that is a story that a lot of people can connect with. Not in the same way as Romeo and Juliet, but that through line, that base of the story is still the same. All of Shakespeare's plays are written in that way, where there is a universal story underneath all of the flowery language. And that is why we talk about 5-act structure, because he wrote them in 5-act structure. So when writing these universal stories that are a little longer and sometimes a little bit more fantastical, I find that 5-act structure is best. Now, if you don't know any of his plays, that's okay. I'm going to throw up a couple examples on the screen from johnyorkstory.com that I think are pretty great. So for one, we have Macbeth, which is one of Shakespeare's plays, I know, but hey, it's okay in case you're familiar. Then we have The Godfather. If you're interested in reading, go ahead and pause. And then finally, we have Uncharted 4, A Thief's End. So if you're familiar with any one of those 3 pieces of media, you might be able to see how a 5-act structure can kind of click and connect and how it might be easier to prep. But if you're still struggling to see, that's okay. Let's go ahead and break it down even further. So if we're going to break it down for our D&D campaign, this is what we need to think about first. 1, are we starting a new arc in an ongoing campaign, or is this our first arc in the campaign? It doesn't change too much in this first step. It'll change more later on down the line as we get to connections and twist. So let's just say we are starting from scratch here. So what you're going to do is you're going to come up with your idea, right? What do you want your campaign to be about? That's kind of the thing you need to figure out first. Now, if you don't have your campaign fully figured out yet, that's okay. Pause this video and come back to it later. However, make sure you subscribe because this time next month, I'll be releasing a video on 10 campaign ideas that you can steal to run at your tables. I think they're pretty cool. I'll even have like full documentation and a whole bunch of resources for you to use for these campaigns. It's pretty cool. So come up with your campaign idea. Once you have that, come back here, and this is what you're going to do. You're going to write on your screen Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, Act 5. Now, these acts are going to follow climactic plot structure. However, it's easy to assume that that means Act 1 is your exposition, Act 2 is your inciting incident, Act 3 is your climax, 4 is your falling action, and 5 is your resolution. That's not the case. right? Don't think of climactic plot structure as a, line, a pyramid, and then a straight line, right? The falling action of a story should never be as long as the rising action. So we want to make sure that when we write our stories, it is unbalanced. There is more exposition and rising action than there is falling action and resolution. If you look at any of the 5-act structure images that I threw up a little bit ago, Act 1 is our inciting incident when the story kicks off. Act 2 typically introduces our antagonist of some way, or it further develops the plot through events in our rising action. Act 3 is another point of rising action, but typically there's some type of inverse there. There's some type of twist. There's some type of thing that goes terribly wrong. Act 4 is our crisis. A crisis is a lot like an inciting incident, whereas the inciting incident is the point of no return for the heroes, for the protagonist. The crisis is the same thing, but at the crisis, there is now no going back before the climax at all. This is in video games. You know how you get to that point where you walk up to the boss door and it's like, make sure you finish everything else you want to finish because there's no going back from this point. That's that point, right? The crisis is the point of no return for the end. So once they cross the threshold of the crisis, they reach the climax and resolution, typically within Act 5. So you see how the back half is weighted so heavily. There is so much going on in terms of exposition, inciting incident, and rising action that the last 2 acts are your crisis and climax, with your resolution being at the tail end there. The reason we do this is because in no world should your falling action and should your resolution be as long as the rest of the story. We want our campaigns to be exciting, to be fun. We want them to be a roller coaster of emotion and action. So how do we do that? Well, my friend, the way we do that is making sure that our rising action is so much longer than the rest of the campaign. We want to make sure that we're building tension, we're building emotion, we're putting a driving force, lighting a fire underneath our players so they feel pressured to achieve that climax, to achieve that resolution. But the other reason why we don't drag out the falling action and drag out that resolution is because we want a clean break, right? We want our story to have a definitive end. When the climax happens, when they conclude that part, when they kill the boss, when they cleanse the land of disease, when they defeat the dragon, whatever they're doing, when they do that, the story begins to calm, but clearly. We don't want a messy epilogue. We don't want a messy falling action. The dragon dies. The land begins to return to normal. They begin to talk to some NPCs about what happened and how they're going to rebuild. And that's it. We don't want the end of our story to drag out because we want the players to remember the fun action they had. Now, I will say I want to make a small caveat here. Your falling action and resolution of a story is disconnected from any downtime you have between arcs within your campaign. If you want to have 2 or 3 sessions of downtime, that's totally okay. It does not need to be a driving force behind the players. You want to make sure that your arcs, right, this 5-act structure that you make, you want to make sure that that is the driving force within it, that your players feel a lot of pressure within the arcs, but when they get out of them, make sure they have plenty of time to rest, to relax, to talk, to just chat and have fun, to do some shopping. Have those moments so that way when they dive back into the arc, they're excited for it. You never want to give your players drama fatigue, where the story is constantly pressuring them so they feel like they get no breaks. It was a mistake I made early on in my DM career, and I want to try and help you avoid the same thing. Now, with all of that in mind, we have 5 acts, right, that we need to fill in. What you're going to do is you're going to write a sentence or 2 about each act, where you want it to go. What big thing you want to have happen, right? What is your inciting incident? What kicks off the adventure? And then a couple of points of rising action. Where are some places that the story could go? This is all brainstorming right now. It may change later on, and it may even change as you're playing. So come up with all those ideas. Figure out what exactly you want to do and how exactly it's going to work. And eventually, you want to end in Act 5 with whatever the big climax is. What is the big thing that happened that changes the story forever? So you go through and you write a sentence or two about each act. Then, in terms of in-depth prepping, you are only going to do that one act at a time. The reason you do this is because so much in D&D there is, or in any tabletop RPG, there is this need for fluidity in storytelling. You need to make sure that you are malleable and that your story can change and shift depending on what's needed. So you have an idea of where you want the story to go. That's good. You want to have a plan. You don't want to just make everything up every single session because you'll lose track. You won't remember everything from session to session. And then that's not a good feeling when a player asks you something and you simply can't remember. So that means when you're starting an arc, you write Act 1 through 5 and you figure out a sentence or two about each one. And then you prep only Act 1. Right? What are the beats in Act 1? What are the important moments? What are some of the combat encounters? What do the players need to discover? And how do they get thrust into this event? Now, this might only be a session or two, and that's okay. Your exposition and inciting incident should be shorter sessions. This goes back to the Avatar video where I talked about embracing your inciting incident, which go ahead and watch that if you haven't yet. Once they get towards the end of the arc, right? They're getting close to the end of Act 1. They're about to achieve the inciting incident. They've gathered all the narrative beats they need to be able to move on to the next act. Well, at the end of that session, that's the week where you prep Act 2. Now, Act 2 is probably going to be longer. It might be 4 or 5 sessions. So that means you only need to prep one time for those 4 or 5 weeks that you play, and then you come back after Act 2 is done. And you prep that 4 or 5 sessions, get everything ready to go, and you're good to go, right? This is what helped me in terms of the heavy lifting of prep. If I have a through line established, it makes it easier to come back and prep each individual act, and only prepping one act at a time was easier for my brain to rationalize. Not only that, but you end up not falling into the trap of prepping every session before every session, which that gets you on this like hamster wheel where you feel like you're never ahead. You're always just running to catch up. You're afraid that the players are going to get to the end of the content before the end of the session, and you don't want to end early because that makes you feel like a bad guy or a bad person. So doing this instead, you feel ahead of the game when you go into sessions. You're like, okay, nope, I know what's happening 4 or 5 sessions from now. And because you know, it makes it so much easier to adjust or even nudge the players in the direction you want them to go. Do not force them, but sometimes players need additional guidance to kind of know where to go. Something I learned in theater is that a captive audience is great, but sometimes a captive audience can also be kind of stupid. So you want to make sure that in whatever way you're nudging them to go, you try to make it more obvious than not. Because most of the time, players aren't ignoring what you're doing because they think it's boring. They just don't know it's something they're supposed to follow. But enough about that. That is act structure. That is how I prep. That has helped me immensely make sure that I don't fall into that hamster wheel of prepping before every session and really just kind of feeling like I'm not doing enough. Next up, we have connections. Now, connections, ooh, this is my favorite part. I love this so much. It makes me so happy because these are the moments. This step is where you get the most enjoyment from your players. Doing these things is where you get real, genuine engagement. Because listen, somebody could love your story that you're telling as a DM, the narrative that you've chosen to unfold. I mean, so many players love Curse of Strahd. They love the story. They love Strahd as an NPC. But if you ask somebody who's played Curse of Strahd, what's their favorite memory from it? 9 times out of 10, they're going to tell you a story related to their player character. Because I think that all humans, to a degree, are inherently selfish. And especially when it comes to the things that we care about. And most D&D players care about their characters. They want them to do cool things. They want them to feel badass and awesome and do awesome things and have stuff happen to them. To feel like they're a part of the world. And Connections is where we do that. So in Connections, what you're going to do is you're going to look at the beats that you've written. Whether it be for Act 1 and where it is for the sentence or two that you wrote for the rest of the acts. From all of the things you've written, what are connections you can make to your world, to other NPCs, to other locations in the world, but most importantly, to player backstories? That one is by far the most important. It's awesome to make your world seem interconnected, but connecting your players to the plot, best thing you can do for yourself. If your players kind of struggle with coming up with compelling backstories that make it easy on you as a DM, Mark made a video. Granted, it is 3 years old at this point, but the advice is still good about knife theory, which was a popular Reddit post on the D&D subreddit ages ago. Mark made a video extrapolating on it. It's really great. Go ahead and watch that. Yeah. No, wait, here. It's up in this corner. Whoopsie. And all you do is you look at the beats that you've written for Act 1. You look at the sentence or two summary that you've written for Act 2 through 5. How do you connect it to your players and to the world that you've created? That's all you look to do. Where can you add those connections? It helps make the world seem alive and truly impactful. As an example, we have a group of adventurers who are heading into a old decrepit town that seems to be falling to ruin. There is a wizard's tower there, and you know that one of the players, the backstory that they have is they're a wizard. Their father was a wizard, and they come from a long line of wizards and mages, and he just wants to make his lineage proud. Okay, that's a fine enough dagger that we can use, or a knife as it's called in the video. That's good enough. We can use that. This wizard, you know what? Maybe that's their uncle. You know, maybe the family's not very close. They just know that they are wizards and all that. So this is his uncle in the tower. Yeah, I think that's okay. Sure, cool, let's do that. See, that's just one connection. And then the player can use that. They need to approach the wizard's tower to gain information on what happened in the town because the townsfolk don't want to share it. And so there, the wizard, the uncle, will be so excited to see his nephew. Hasn't seen him in ages, not since he was little. And is so happy that he's here now and is willing to share information, maybe more willingly than what seems like he should. So like I said, go through what you have written so far and see what connections you can make to the player backstories, to the other locations in the world, or to other NPCs the players have met or know about through their backstories. So then finally we move on to the unexpected twists. Now that you have gone through, you have written your plot beats for Act 1, and you have your summary of Acts 2 through 5, and you have your connections for player backstories, for world events, for all that good stuff we just talked about. You look at everything you have so far, and how can you twist it? How can you turn the obvious into a subversion? How can you take a trope and flip it on its head? These moments, this adds the spice. This adds the sriracha, the tahini, the Frank's Red Hot. This is what makes it good. These twists will help keep your campaign fresh and exciting. You don't want to become the M. Night Shyamalan of D&D tables, so you don't want to take your 5th act and flip it on its head where, oh, the bad guy was actually good every single time. Instead, what you want to do is you want to look for small areas that you can just sort of like pinch and twist and change it up a little bit, where you just take your initial idea and change it, which is a fun way to get you to do a second draft on the things you already have written. Very rarely is the first idea we have for anything the best idea. Drafting and revising is so incredibly important to any art form. And as a DM, you are an artist. You're writing a story. You're improvising a story. When you can, revise as much as possible. And that's what this section allows us to do. It allows us to go back to what we've already written and try and make it better. And also add some fun little plot twists, which I have a video about if you want to watch it. Boop, 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 boop. Twists will allow you to keep your campaign dynamic and engaging, and not only fun for the players to invest their time and effort and energy into, but fun for you to write, fun for you to make. And that's the goal. The goal was to make the prep process fun. And it worked for me. I love prepping now, even though it is homework. But it's like homework that you enjoy doing because you're flexing muscles that you like to use. You're creating something that you know people are going to get a lot of enjoyment out of, yourself included. That is the act structure. That is what I do to prep my arcs, my campaigns, my acts, and my beats. The only caveat that I will add at the very end of this, and this is incredibly important, so pay attention, please. You should never prioritize the story you have written on your sheet of paper or in Legend Keeper, in World Anvil, in your Word document, in your Google Doc, wherever it is written. Never, ever, ever prioritize that over the story that you're telling at the table together. D&D horror stories are born from that ideology. You need to be okay with letting your ideas die sometimes. It's very hard to do. The thing is, you can still keep the narrative through line you were hoping for, but you need to adapt it to what the players want to do as well. It doesn't feel good when you feel like your ideas don't matter, your contributions don't matter, that their story is better than anything you could have ever thought of. That's the beauty in something like Baldur's Gate 3. That game is so fun and engaging because how much the story and the game takes into account the player's actions. I'm not saying you have to be Baldur's Gate 3. What I am saying, though, is you want to try and emulate their adaptability. So with that, thank you for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions about the methodology I use, or just you'd like advice on your D&D campaigns, I'd be happy to help you out in the comments in whatever way I can. And if you don't take any of my advice, that's also okay. I understand that this methodology isn't going to work for everybody because not everybody runs narrative-based campaigns like I do. It's what my players like, it's what I like, so that's what we roll with. So with that, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to subscribe for more, like the video if you like the video, and comment if you have any ideas of what you'd like to see next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.